Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is Bradley. Bradley, welcome to the show.
Hello, Vic. Thank you for having me on.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate your time. Bradley, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Well, I'm 27 years old. I live in Banchory, Scotland. It's in the Aberdeenshire region of Scotland. It's on the east coast. Well, it's classified as the northeast of Scotland. They call it the oil region of Scotland. I'm a medical researcher, a writer, and I have shares in a removal company.
So in other words, you're a well-rounded guy. At least it sure sounds that way. I'm impressed. Before you had your encounter, Bradley, would you describe yourself as being open-minded or more in the skeptical side of things when it came to things like cryptids?
I was always on the skeptical side of things, to be dead honest with you. I never really, I was open to anything, but at the same time, I did kind of think that, like up in Scotland, we're kind of known for Loch Ness, and I don't know, I was always a bit kind of just skeptical of the cryptid world. I never really gave it much thought, and it was never really something that, I would hear like people maybe sometimes talk about Nessie or something else, like a UFO or something like that, but I never really gave it much time or consideration. A lot of times I thought it was people's imaginations kind of going rampant.
Well, that's understandable. Unless you understand things about cryptids and put some kind of research into it, I guess that's pretty much what you would expect. It is a lot to wrap one's head around. Every time I hear an episode where a UK encounter is discussed, this comes up, so I might as well ask you about this. A lot of people who live in the UK and are interested in large cryptids think there's no way one could live there. What would you say to them about that?
It's typically the British culture. It's funny because we have a history of many different mythological creatures and that type of thing, but yet in the modern day, we just we're very reserved and we don't really like to really talk much about these type of things. And another thing is there's kind of like a stigma in a sense that, the people that say that they've seen, like a Sasquatch or like a, Nessie or a UFO, you're kind of seen as, oh, you're crazy or you're mentally ill or something like that. I would just say just very skeptical as a culture of those type of things.
It's funny how you've got all these legends that have been passed down through all the years over there in Europe and obviously the UK there, but present day, people just turn their noses up when they hear about things like Dogman or Sasquatch or things that were commonly accepted back in the day. I guess that's progress for you. It's kind of hard to figure out, but I guess that just must be progress. You described yourself as being a skeptic. Did you know about Dogman before you had your encounter?
I had no idea about Dogman. I never really did much research into cryptids. I'd spent some time in the United States and I'd heard about Sasquatch and that type of things when I was a bit younger, but I never really researched much into it. I never really knew anyone that had seen anything. So it was it was new to me, when I started to look into things and that type of thing. It was just new. And even after my encounter, I really had a hard time believing it just because, I didn't have the research behind me. I wasn't really aware of that realm, or that world that exists. And, it was just very skeptical. And, like I said, I've never really been around people that had seen anything. And I just kind of thought, well, I think maybe it's the imaginations of the mind. But as my encounter happened, my worldview was thrown upside down. So I stood corrected.
Well, considering the fact that you really weren't into cryptids back then, it's no surprise that you didn't even know about Dogman, because unless you put some kind of research into it, I guess you probably won't know about them. You used to camp before you had your encounter. Have you gone since you had it?
I used to camp a lot, and I used to, do a lot of things with different groups and that type of thing. But no, I haven't camped as much since then. And another thing is I've been invited many times to go camping with friends and family, that type of thing, and I've rejected more than I've went. And yeah, it's definitely ever since the encounter, I have not camped as much. That's definitely an area of enjoying the outdoors that I haven't really been into as much.
Well, it's understandable, but it's still a shame that you can't enjoy the woods the way you once used to. You said you haven't done much in the way of camping since, but have you been in the woods alone since it happened?
I have. I've done more hiking and walking. That's still those two things that I really like to do. But I used to hike, walk, and camp quite a bit. But now it's just solely hiking and walking. And every now and then I will go camping, but I never go camping alone. And another thing is that I think the reason being is that ever since I had my encounter, the thing was that because I used to camp alone quite a bit, I was always a bit, it just in the back of my mind thinking of what I'd seen and will I see it again, and so it always kind of put me off camping alone. But I don't camp. I think it's mainly because as well as that I'm staying overnight in the woods or out in the wilderness. So it kind of just in the back of my mind, the mind likes to play with games with you, and you ask certain questions to yourself, and if you hear a certain noise, it might freak you out or startle you, and then your mind goes rampant, and the next you know you're huffing and puffing and freaking out or something. So
Do you get a pit in your stomach whenever you think about all the times you camped alone like that?
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's I sometimes look back and think all those times like before the encounter as well, all those times I had by myself, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, just walking about the woods, looking at the beautiful moon and the stars, thinking, oh, there's something out there that I had no idea was there, and that maybe it was watching me or maybe it was aware of me. I'm not too sure, but looking back, it does put that pit in your stomach.
Oh, I'm sure it does. Understandably so. Your encounter happened between a town called Lobie Coldstone and Tarland. What can you tell us about that area, and how close were you to the towns when you had your encounter?
So Lobie Coldstone is a wee village, and Tarland's, I would say it's more of a town, but it's kind of in between a village and a town. They're both really close to a town called Aboyne, and it's beautiful countryside. It's mixed between open fields and woodlands, but also that area is also the start of the Scottish Highlands going into the Cairngorms. So it's very beautiful, very colourful, tons of Scottish heather, lovely birch trees. You will get a little bit of oak here and there, but it's mainly birch and plenty of deer in that area. But it is really beautiful country. The locals in Aboyne, Lobie Coldstone and Tarland, and the surrounding wee places around it, they call that area God's country. It's just because of the sheer beauty of it. There's something magical. It does look like it's in a fairy tale or a movie. It's stunning.
Well, from the way you described the area, I can understand why they would call it that. All right, Bradley, please tell us about your encounter now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Hi. So I was helping my dad move his mother and father to a sheltered accommodation, and they're quite old, and they needed a bit more help in regards to living. And so in Scotland, we have these sheltered accommodations to where they live on their own, but they do get assistance during the day. And if they do have like help for if there's an emergency at night and that type of thing. So we're moving them from kind of like a house where they were completely on their own with no help to a sheltered accommodation. I was with my dad. We rented a van, a white van, and we were pretty much spending the whole day just moving all their stuff from the house into their new place in Tarland. So it was from Lobie Coldstone to a place called Tarland. And it's only about, from Lobie Coldstone to Tarland, you're looking at about, maybe I would say about a 15-minute drive. It's not very far. There's two ways you can get there. There's a back way and then there's a main roadway. Me and my dad, we'd been working hard all that day, and we were discussing, like philosophies and ideas and just different things about life and that type of thing. And, we were working hard, and it was getting on in the evening. And at midnight is when we did our last load, our last trip before everything was done and wrapped up. So we decided to go the back road to Tarland. Another thing was that our van, because this was our last load, we tried to pack as much as we could in the van. And quite interesting was that we had to drive really slow, was just because the van was just absolutely packed with stuff, and we didn't want to like stress the suspension on the van. It was an older van, and we also just, because it was at nighttime in Scotland here, because we're out in the country, the deer like to kind of run about, and there's been many cars that have hit deer out there and just demolished their vehicles. So for us, we just kind of wanted to not take any risks and not be wild, and we just decided, let's rather be safe than sorry. So it was quite a windy night that evening. Usually in Scotland, when the wind blows, it will blow and it'll howl. What usually happens is that the wind, it'll cut through the trees, and it will sometimes howl. Scotland at night's got a funny feeling to it as well, especially that area. It's got, sometimes it'll be windy, but sometimes it'll have like a fog, be very foggy. Many people, when they come to Scotland, they always say that it's majestic, but it has like an eerie feel to it. So yeah, we were heading down the back road. We decided to take the back road to Tarland, and the back road is wooded. There's woods that are kind of surrounding the road, more so on the right. On the left, there's a bit of trees right on the left side of the road heading to Tarland, but it slopes down. It's a bit of an edge of a hill, and then it just slopes down, and then it goes down for maybe 25 feet, and then it'll kind of flatten out into like fields, people's property, that type of thing, different estates. So we're heading to Tarland, and it was very windy, and being out in between Tarland and Lobie Coldstone, at night time, it was a clear night. There wasn't really any clouds in the sky, so you can see the stars and the moon. It was really beautiful. And it got really interesting. We were going slow. We were probably going about 25 miles per hour, just to be on the safe side with a van. It was an older van, so we headed to Tarland, and not even a minute outside of Lobie Coldstone, heading to Tarland, not even a minute, we had seen a dog, and it was going from the right side of the road to the left. Another thing that I'd like to point out is that it was going in the direction of the wind. It was kind of going with the wind. And because we were going so slow, it wasn't hard for us to stop the car because we were going, the van, because we were going so slow. So when we had seen this, I initially thought, me and my dad both thought this was just a dog. This was someone's lost dog. You don't really see many stray dogs in our area, but yeah, it was quite an interesting sight. So it came from the right side of the road, or the forest, and it was just crossing the road, and it was just heading just across the road, and it was going down our left. And it was very weird because I thought it was a dog, and it had the characteristics of a normal canine. It was the thing I could liken it to would be if like it had the face of like a German Shepherd, but it also had characteristics as well of a wolf. So the way I like to see it, it's almost like if a German Shepherd and a wolf had a baby, then this would be what the face looked like, because it had like a German Shepherd's face, but with like the neck of a wolf. There was plenty of fur around the neck. I did notice that right away, was that it was very furry around, and it was thick fur around the neck of it. Also, the snout, its snout was way longer than you'd usually see a German Shepherd's or a wolf's. It was thicker. I did notice that as well. It was longer snout than normal. Not too much longer, but it was longer. I did notice that as well. I just found it more prominent on the face. The face was big. It had a very big face. That was another thing. The fur, as it got down, so from the neck and onto its shoulders, it was very thick and furry. long fur as well. It was longer, much like a wolf fur. And as the fur went down its back towards its rear end, the fur was thinner. It wasn't as tall, wasn't as long. It was it kind of went to the fur of like a hyena, or like a like a ridgeback, or a Labrador, just smaller fur in length, but also it looked thinner as well. It kind of looked a bit patchier in the back. Its fur coat was black. It wasn't like just clean jet black. It was like dirty black. It almost looked like it had rolled in a bit of mud. So but it was black fur. I didn't see any spots or stripes or anything like that. Its shoulder, one thing I noticed, and that kind of threw me off because I thought this was a normal dog, but then looking at it, because it was going across the road very slow. It wasn't going fast. Its shoulder blades, I noticed its shoulders and its head and neck. Its shoulders were higher than its hips and its back legs. And for me, I found that very unique because I've never seen a dog like that. The only thing I could think of is the only thing that I know that has higher shoulders than its back legs and hips is like a hyena. But that's the thing, is it didn't look like a hyena. And it like I said, it had wolf-like characteristics to it, mixed in with German Shepherdy type looks, but it was black. Another thing I immediately thought when I'd seen it was, and I actually was a bit concerned for it because I love animals, and here in Scotland we're a very animal loving people. I thought its legs were actually broken. But then thinking that while I was looking at it, the way it was moving was telling a completely different story. It looked like its legs were broken to a degree, but yet it was moving very fluid-like, and it didn't look like it had any distress on its face, or there was no whimpers, there was no noises. It was just, it looked fine, and it looked healthy as well. I thought its back legs were broken because I found them to be a bit more bent than you would see in like a normal dog. They were a lot more bent than what I normally see. And that kind of threw me off. And so another thing was that when it was going across the road, it almost looked like it was crawling. I knew it was walking, but it kind of had this look like that it was crawling. It was kind of like grabbing onto the road. And that threw me off. That, for me, I was looking at this, and like I said, I'm a medical researcher, and I look at like different things, on a scientific basis. And there was a lot of things that just wasn't adding up. A lot of things that were out of place. My brain was looking at this and trying to decide, is this natural? Is this unnatural? What is this? And for that moment, when I'd seen that, I kind of thought, did I just enter the Twilight Zone? So for me, I just didn't know if I went into another dimension, another portal. I didn't know what happened. I was like just completely stunned at what I'd seen. It just felt really bizarre. And that word is just something that has always stuck with me. I couldn't get, I can't get over that word bizarre, because it was just completely bizarre. So the animal, the Dogman. Now, I didn't know anything about the Dogman at the time. So it looked like it was crawling across the road. Another thing was that it looked, although I initially thought its legs were broken, its actions and movement were telling a completely different story, because it looked very strong. It didn't look like, like I've seen a few photos of it, should I say, artistry, like paintings and stuff like that of it, and drawings, but it didn't look like it wasn't super bulky or nothing like that, but you could definitely see its muscles. I would say it had the physique more of like a lean, mean fighting machine type, rather than like your tankier builds. It was leaner. But although it was leaner, around the neck, because of the fur, and the fur was extending down into the chest, I couldn't really see the upper chest area because of the fur. But the legs, especially the front, looked really strong, but very lean. it looked like a powerful animal. I remember looking at it and thinking that was a very powerful animal that I'd just seen. I thought it was like some type of weird hyena hybrid, but then it kind of did things that it kind of threw me off because I noticed one thing when it was crawling across the road was that when it was kind of, it, it was kind of grabbing the road, but I could kind of see a bit more shoulder rotation than you normally see in any type of canines. And so for me, I was looking at that and I was like, no, that's a big, I would just call that like a spooky red flag, like, of being that this may not be like completely like, this isn't normal that you'd see in canines. And so it had a bit more shoulder rotation, or I say shoulder, but its front leg rotation. That threw me off a bit as well. And when it was going across the road, it never looked at us. We had the light beaming right on it. It was only about 30 feet away. We got a clear view of it, and it never looked at us. I never really felt frightened by it, but I just thought that I'm glad I'm in the van and I'm glad I'm not alone. But I never felt frightened by it. I more actually felt like I crossed into the Twilight Zone or something like that. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what was going on. I just knew it wasn't normal. It was weird. I've never had it happen before. And it blew my mind. It absolutely blew. It took everything. I was very skeptical of cryptids, and it took everything that I thought was just the loose runnings of the imagination, and it flipped it onto its world, upside down. And I was just sitting there and I was just thinking, like, maybe these people that have claimed to see Sasquatch and to see Nessie and to see UFOs or something, and the things of the like, the chupacabra and these different things in the natural world. I was starting to think maybe they actually did see something, because I was thinking, I don't know how I'm going to explain this to anyone else. Because most of a lot of Scots think kind of like, are very skeptical of that type of thing until they see it. And then they're like, oh, right. So another thing I'd like to talk about is with the Dogman. And I didn't know the name at the time. I just thought it was like the hyena wolf thing, but I'm glad I know what it was now. But the Dogman, as it was going across the road, it was going down the slope, which it was going down the slope on the left side. And I don't know why, and I can't explain what it was doing or why it did it, but it looked like it never looked at us, never looked back. No noises were ever made, but it as it was going across the road and it started to go down, like it was walking down, and I was pretty much just seeing its rear end. It went from me just seeing its rear end to it started to like stand up as it was moving. And I went from me just seeing its rear end right before it entered the complete darkness of the tree line into down the slope. I was starting to see its back, its lower back, and then its middle back. And that threw me off, because for me, I was thinking, okay, that's a slope. You're going down this, the side of this little hill, and all of a sudden, I should only be seeing your back legs and rear end, but then now I'm starting to see your lower back and then your mid back and that was the last I'd seen was its mid back before the lights of the van no longer, and the distance away from the road, I could no longer see it anymore. It just blended into the darkness. So with the lights of the van and that certain distance away, I just before it went into the darkness, I just saw the middle back. So after that had happened, I didn't believe what I'd seen, and I had to ask my dad. I said, "Dad, did you just see that?" And I was like, "Am I alone? Have I lost my mind, or did you just see like a dog thing, like walk across the road?" And he said, "No, like I just saw that as well." And I was like, "So I'm not losing my mind. I'm not too tired because it is midnight." And he's like, "No, I've just seen it as well." And my dad's the same as me, but he's even more skeptical than me. He's the most skeptical man I've ever known. And he had sat there and seen this, and then he actually, when I looked over to him, he was on my right. I'm my left. No, he was on my right. I'm sorry. He looked stunned. He looked absolutely stunned. And for us, it was just, what did we just witness? And will we be able to talk to this, talk to anyone about this? And we kind of decided to keep it to ourselves because we didn't think anyone would understand. And here is my dad. He's the most skeptical man that I've ever known. And here he is telling me, like, let's keep this to ourselves. But he said, I think we've seen something that is quite, it's a controversy, but he said that I think we've seen something that maybe shouldn't have been seen, and that maybe, much like the Sasquatch, it's one of these things that, there's not a lot of evidence for, but we saw it with our eyes, and I could see that he was shaken, but we decided to kind of go ahead and head to his mom and dad's, their new place that we're moving them to, and we kind of just worked in silence, thinking about what we'd seen. So we later kind of started to talk about it, and we've been talking about it ever since, speculating what this could be. And we started to do a bit of research, and that's when we kind of figured out that there's many sightings of this thing called a Dogman. And so that's where we kind of learned that, okay, that we're not alone in seeing a creature like this, and that we're not as crazy as we think we are, and we're not losing our minds. And, it kind of made sense because later on, I would come to talk to many police officers in our region, but also many different gamekeepers. Now, a gamekeeper in Scotland is the same as a game warden. And I've heard many stories from the policemen, but also gamekeepers, after the encounter especially. And it all kind of just started to kind of piece together. And it actually made me feel better because it was, I wasn't alone. There was gamekeepers, seeing certain weird things, and there was farmers losing a little bit of sheep, or their sheep were misplaced, or they had a patch out of their wool coat or something like that. Just really strange occurrences that I kind of over time have just chatted to a few folks and speculated. And so, yeah, that was my encounter. And ever since, it changed my life ever since, because I never really wanted to, after that, I kind of just, I second guessed myself when it came to camping. I didn't mind walking in the woods alone, but I've just been more aware, and I've just been kind of more like, I'll walk in the woods as long by myself, but I don't think I can sleep in the woods by myself anymore, just because I think I'd be terrified to see that outside of a van. I was inside of a van, so I don't think I'd want to see that outside of a van. And even more so, me just being in a sleep, hearing weird noises, and then waking up and then seeing, it looking at me or anything like that. I just don't know how I'd handle it. I didn't like what I'd seen being in the van, so I can't imagine being like, without that van. I guess you could call it protection, but although that was another thing, is when I'd seen the creature, Dogman, it had that look like it didn't have a care in the world, like in regards to us being there. It was just going on its way. But it did almost have this persona to it that if it wanted to, it could rip our heads off. Another thing is that it didn't really seem like it almost had this persona to it that it didn't care what anyone thought of it. It was going to do its own thing, regardless of what anyone was doing or regardless of what anyone thought. I feel like if we honked our horn, it would be the type of animal that would just continue doing its thing. And if it was a human, it would probably give us, as they call it, the bird or something like that, So it was riveting, and it was very interesting. But the word that I cannot get over, and that just, for my encounter, the word that keeps coming to my mind is just bizarre. Absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, that and then some. After you had your encounter, you found out about something strange that happened in that area. What more can you tell us about that?
So my encounter happened, and I remember it clear because of certain events around that, but this happened in April, and I remember due to the season, and also it happened in the month of my birthday, because my birthday's on the 18th of April, and it only happened I can't remember pinpointing the day, but it was maybe about a week and a half before my birthday. So I remember it being in April, and it was in the year 2016. Now, I don't know the exact day. Well, I was doing a bit of research because I'm into the medical field, and I research many different things like prescription drugs and the effects, and even things on a cellular level as well with side effects and that type of thing. And also different types of medicines that are made that the NHS tries to make and stuff like that. Well, I was doing research, and I had found out that a month before, it's actually in March. Now, it may not have been a full month. It may have just been 3 weeks, because I can't really remember the actual day that I had my encounter. But I would just say a month or maybe a little bit under that. It was in March of 2016 when there was a missing 411 case in the same area, or should I say region, of Scotland. And I remember clear because I know the policeman in my town in Bankery, and I had spoken to them, and I'm quite close with them, and they had kind of told me a few things. And they had said that there had been a man that had went missing. He was an experienced climber. He was an ex-soldier, and he had hiked 282 Munros, which are like the peaks of hills, right? And he was very efficient and experienced in the woodlands, especially up here. He was a Scot, and he went missing with no trace of him, and there was nothing found. Well, apparently there was in this report when they were kind of doing the search near a place called Macdhu. The funny thing that I kind of gathered from one of the local policemen was that there was apparently a gamekeeper that had, in the kind of the area that he was managing, the area that the guy had went missing as well, he had seen a dog. He said it was a very large dog, and he said it resembled a wolf. And he said it was, the policeman had told me that he had never seen a dog like it. And so I just found that interesting that here in Scotland we had this missing 411 case the month before that I had my encounter. Now, I'm not saying anything in regards to that. It's related. I found it interesting that a gamekeeper as well, managing the woodlands and the land of Scotland, I just found it interesting that he had said, he made a report that he'd seen like this dog, this very big dog, and that but it kind of intimidated him to a slight degree. And gamekeepers, they have rifles and shotguns, so I did find that interesting. And there was also another bit of weird kind of, I don't know if it's related, but it's really strange, was that after I'd had my encounter, the police actually ended up looking for a stray dog, and with the threat of it attacking people. They said they had a report near a place called Scolty. There was a stray dog it was spooking their horses because their horses were kind of going a bit mad. And so I'd spoken to the police when I was actually heading just to a restaurant just in my local town. And this was kind of like later on as well. And he had said just to keep my eyes peeled and say if I see a stray dog, just to report it immediately to the police. But they had said there was reports of it being possibly aggressive, and it had spooked a few horses, and that it's roaming about. So they just said as well, try not to like walk out like by the river or out in the woods or anything like that just for now. But I did find that strange. I don't know if it's kind of related to the same Dogman that I had encountered, but they're definitely out there, and it took me by surprise. They say seeing is believing, and I never thought in a million years I'd ever say something like this, but I'm a believer, definitely a believer.
Well, it is. You never do expect to see anything like that. If you were a betting man, Bradley, how much would you bet that the Dogman you saw was responsible for that experienced hiker's disappearance?
I think I know many gamekeepers here in this region, in Braemar and Ballater and on the Royal D side where we live here. And I do honestly think that it is related, mainly because of how experienced he was. And Scotland's a funny place because although we have a lot of wild landscapes, it's not completely wild because we have gamekeepers that do roam and do kind of set traps for certain animals and maintain the land and maybe burn heather, once or twice a year or whatever. And they're all about the land here. So they know kind of what's going on a lot of the times. Well, at least we think. But even them, they do have some really strange occurrences that happened. But me personally, with as experienced as he was, and another thing was that it wasn't just him on that Monroe. There was other people that were there. There wasn't a lot of people, but there were other people that were doing the same Monroe. And him being an ex-soldier as well, having that training in survival, I think it's related. I think that possibly it could be that Dogman. I'm not too sure, but I think it is, personally.
Well, you just might be right about that. Do you think it could have hurt you and your dad that night if it wanted to, even though you two were sitting in the van?
Yes, my dad is quite a tall man. I'm very tall. I'm quite tall. I'm 6'2", and I'm about 235 pounds. I like to lift weights, and I compete in the Highland sports here. Like, we have the Highland Games once a year as well, and I like to do a lot of throwing and that type of thing. So I'm not physically a weak man in any way, but I know that if I was to mess with this thing or try to make this creature mad, I know that if that thing was to attack me and my dad that night, I know that me and him, being very strong and tall men, I don't think we would be able to handle that. Another thing would be that it took us by surprise, but I know that if it would have started walking towards us bipedally, that would have terrified me. And yeah, I just know that if it attacked us, I know without a doubt, it would probably rip our heads off or split us open or something like that. And yeah, I don't think we would have been much of a challenge for it, to be dead honest with you.
Oh, sure, you two wouldn't have stood a chance if it decided to attack you. Where do you think it was heading when you saw it that night?
So on the left side of the road, heading from Lobie Coldstone to Tarland, there's different estates. It's different beautiful fields. Some are used for farming, like rapeseed farming for oils and that type of thing. But there's also some horses, and also another man. He kind of has sheep out in a field. Now, I don't know where it was headed. It looked like it was actually headed towards more of the hilly region. So as you go beyond that fieldy area, the open fields, it kind of goes back into the traditional Scottish hills, that type of thing. So I was thinking it looked like it was headed that way, but I started to think maybe it was, I don't know if it was going there to the hills or maybe to the estates to mess with maybe some of the animals or whatnot. And I also thought maybe that's why it started to stand bipedally, was because maybe it's seen a horse or a sheep or something like that. So I wasn't too sure, and I'm not too sure, but it looked like it was either headed towards one of the fields, one of the estates, or possibly that hilly region where you have the Scottish hills and that type of thing, where it can kind of hide, or I don't know. It's funny, there actually is some caves over there as well. So maybe, I don't know if it was, maybe it's headed towards a cave. I don't know anything about these things in regards to how they sleep or anything like that, but it was either going to be in a field, an estate, or into the hilly regions.
It sounds like there are a lot of good resources in that area for a Dogman to exploit, so yeah, it's no wonder that it likes to hang around that area. How big would you say it was when it stood up onto two legs, and how much do you think it weighed?
That's a very good question. So I thought about this a couple of times, and I'd actually spoken to my dad about this. So when it stood up, I could only get a look at about half of its back, because I couldn't see it fully standing up because of the lights just didn't cover it, and plus it got really dark and it was going down that slope. So I just lost sight of it. It kind of just blended into the darkness because it was very dark. I mean, that's the thing, is the trees here. I mean, you can only see so much, but it gets very dark in between those trees. So looking at it when it was walking or crawling across the road, and seeing half of it stand up, or the half of its back as it was starting to stand up bipedally, I'm going to say it was. I would say it's about. So I'm 6'2". I would say if it was fully stood up on its back legs bipedally, I would probably say this thing was maybe about 8.5 foot. Looking at it crawling across the road, it was big. It was pretty big. I would say 8 foot. I would go in my gut. I think 8 foot would be a good height if it was standing bipedally. because it was a very large dog. I mean, it was very large as it was going across the road. The weight. Now, the weight, I would guess, mm, it was pretty big. And I tell you what, its bones, it's on its back legs, and I say that because its bones look pretty strong as well. They looked really dense, and the muscles in the front, it was lean, but it was muscular. And then also another thing, it had a very large head. Yeah, it would be a heavy beast. I don't know how much it would actually weigh, but it looked very heavy. I don't know. Couldn't really give you a weight. Maybe about three of me. I'm 235 pounds, so maybe three of me. I'm not too sure.
From the way you describe it, one thing's for certain, it was definitely pretty big. Could you tell if there was anything in particular that triggered it to stand up onto two legs like that?
No, I couldn't see anything. The only thing that I could think of was that maybe it had seen a horse and maybe it felt a bit not threatened, but it wanted to kind of show its dominance or something, or maybe kind of show, maybe it did want to know, like let the horses know that it was there. Um, Also, I was thinking maybe it was because it was going down the slope, it might felt that it had better control because it is quite a steep slope. So maybe it didn't want to kind of go head first down the slope. And maybe it felt like it had just a bit better like control of its body, maybe standing bipedally. As a human would kind of, as we're going down a hill, we'd kind of like lean back a bit as we're walking down just to make sure that we can kind of keep our bodies in control, with gravity and all that. So I'm not really too sure whether it was a horse and it had seen a horse or maybe a sheep, or maybe it was just sheer body control because it was going down the slope. I'm not really too sure, to be honest with you.
Well, all those possibilities you just mentioned might be what was behind it, but also, too, maybe it just did that to shake you up because it knew that you were watching. It's really hard to say. Were you more taken aback by its appearance or the fact that you were watching a huge creature that wasn't supposed to even exist?
A little bit of both, but I would say more of the latter. It was more, I'm looking at something that it wasn't supposed to exist. I'm looking at something that is defeating logic. It's defeating my mind trying to reason out what this is. And for me, it was just like trying to logically look at this, and it was just throwing my worldview upside down. It would be the latter. It was more just completely stunned at looking at something that you just wouldn't think would exist. This is something that you'd see in like a book or a TV show or something like Grimm or something like that. It's not something that you'd ever expect to see in real life. So yeah, it definitely threw me in. It definitely threw a curveball into my worldview. That's all I can say on that.
Well, yeah, whenever you see a Dogman, it does have a tendency to do that. Well, Bradley, it's about time for us to get out of here, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
I just wanted to say that if you've ever had an encounter, don't be afraid to talk about it. I've done that. I held it back for a few years, but coming out and talking about it now and speaking to Vic and kind of just chatting with my dad about it, and even to a few other people like the police now and some certain gamekeepers, it just helps to speak about it. So don't be afraid to speak about it. And I know that people may, and they probably will, as they did with me, they will say that you're crazy, but you were there, you know what you've seen. But also just think like you could be helping someone because somebody may not think they exist. And if you're talking to someone about it, they might have that in the back of their mind when they're camping or when they're walking out by themselves. So they might just help someone be a bit more aware, whether they believe it or not. So don't be afraid to talk about it. Also for your mental health, like if it's talking about it's kind of helped me cope with it and accept it and kind of just move on and kind of be a bit more aware when I'm out in the hills and the woods. So yeah, just stay safe and I would just say be very aware and but don't let it ruin your life, and don't let the thought of maybe stumbling upon one like ruin your life. Just enjoy your life but just be aware that there's a world out there that exists that we can't really comprehend.
That's all very well said and great advice. Bradley, I want to thank you so much for coming on and telling us about that experience. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you for having me on, Vic. It's been a very nice experience, and I wish you well.
Well, I'm glad to hear that talking with me and coming on the show like this has helped you so much. That's what this is all about. But having said that, thanks again so much. Have a great night. If you've had a Dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.